Chuckleinik. I'm a reenactor. And for 36 years, I used my hobby of living history to feed my career, which is basically teaching history. And I'd use this to lure my students into realizing how cool history is by me showing up in garb or in armor, and I would be doing my lessons all day and getting weird looks from some of the kids, actually most of the kids, and then they'd calm down. Weird looks from some of the adults, and each day would be a living history day. And it was a great way to work, and it generated a lot of enthusiasm. But I'm not in the class anymore, so I have to do other things. And I realized what I wanted to do was take a look at areas of history that I didn't get a chance to really explore due to limitations in my curriculum. So here I am exploring California history as a reenactor, and I want to tell the tales of these various places and of these various events, and doing it the way a reenactor would in garb. So I've explored the California missions and the Presidios, and I took a look at Russian California, and I've been following banditos and lawmen, and I found a common thread while I was working on the missions, and that was the impact of the Mexican War. And I've decided, all right, let's follow the Mexican War in California. So in my previous video, this was kind of our setup. It was sort of a shoving match between Mexico and the United States. But now in this video, we actually get to start the war. So I hope you stick with me on my journey. On May 13th, 1846, the United States declares war on Mexico. On June 10th, 1846, there was a group of fearful and distrustful American immigrants who were not really happy with the way California was under Mexico. And they had seized a herd of California government-owned horses. And they were already taking action. They looked at the idea of they needed to seize the pueblo of Sonoma and seize Vallejo, and that would stall efforts of the Mexican government to stop them. And so on June 14th, Flag Day, interestingly enough, the Bear Flag Revolt begins, and the pueblo of Sonoma and the barracks of Sonoma get seized without a shot being fired by like 11 a.m. And Vallejo and 3 of his associates are arrested, and they're taken someplace else. And now these Americans have access to the military supplies that were in the barracks that Vallejo had left there for civilian use. Well, there's some new civilians that are going to be using this. And now other American immigrant families start moving north towards Sonoma, and some of them will be staying in the barracks, and some of them will be staying in the homes of individuals around here. The Bear Flag Revolt is on. June 24th, John C. Fremont, who has been in charge of a mapping expedition, which, by the way, has been making a lot of trouble for the Mexican government because Fremont was not sticking with any of the agreements, and he was going into places he wasn't supposed to go to, including occupying Gallivan Peak, which eventually is going to get renamed Fremont Peak. He shows up at Sonoma, and he's abandoned all pretense of neutrality. And what he does is he convinces the rebels, who are calling themselves the Bears, to throw in with him and create an all-volunteer force called the California Battalion. And so each man either signed or he made his mark, and Fremont's forces are growing, and now he's got additional military supplies. So what he's going to do is the next day he is going to march south. He's going to leave 50 men behind, and he's going to march over to Sutter's Fort. And then we're looking at the further rumblings of a war coming between the United States and Mexico. Later in July, Fremont and famed explorer and scout Kit Carson encamped at Mission San Rafael. One of the scouts spotted 3 men coming from San Pablo, and they were coming ashore in a small boat. Fremont felt that they were probably carrying a message to hostile Californios and ordered the men ambushed. Carson and 2 other scouts executed the men, even though it was very likely that they were neutral parties and had no idea what was going on. On July 1st, 1846, with the Bear Flag Revolt going on, John C. Fremont and Kit Carson and a few others end up borrowing a longboat from a ship, and they sail across the bay, which, by the way, Fremont is taking credit for having named the opening the Golden Gate. And they approach the Presidio and the Castillo, and they find them completely abandoned. There happen to be some brass cannon in the Castillo, and so Fremont spikes those so that they can't be used, and returns north to report, yeah, look what we did. Okay, this time there really is a war. On July 7th, 1846, John Drake Sloat, commander of the Pacific Squadron, sails into Monterey Harbor with 3 ships, and he's going to demand the surrender of the forces in Monterey. Well, he's probably remembering Jones's blunder, so what he does is he gives his subordinate, William Servine, the job. You're gonna go in and do it. So Mervine comes ashore with a small party, and he speaks to the Mexican commandant and tells him, hey, you gotta surrender. And the Mexican commander of the Presidio says, I don't have the authority to do this, to surrender the place. Besides, I don't have a garrison here. He had a non-existent garrison. His troops had gone south to reinforce what was going on in Los Angeles. And even if his forces had remained, they didn't have any powder to fill the guns that were actually at the Presidio itself. So what ended up happening is now you have 225 sailors and Marines from the 3 American ships in the harbor. They come ashore, they assemble in front of this place, the Custom House, and it's going to be Mervine that actually raises the flag of the United States. And let's see if I can get well, there's a reproduction of the flagpole. All right, in front of the Custom House. So, while the flag's being raised, there's a proclamation that's read that says there's a state of war between the United States and Mexico, and oh, by the way, the United States has annexed California, deal with it. And there's a 21 gun salute that's fired from the 3 American ships in the harbor. Those are the only shots fired. There were some British ships. They did nothing. They observed. That means the Mexican War is on. And a week later, Commodore Sloat tells Commander Montgomery two things. Tell Fremont to fix the guns that he just messed up, and he also tells Montgomery to take Yerba Buena, which was the town next to the Presidio, take the Presidio, secure it for the United States. And Montgomery shows up on July 9th, and he raises the flag in the Plaza of Yerba Buena, which is later going to become San Francisco. He also sends a party out to Castillo de San Joaquin to make sure that, hey, Fremont's fixed the guns, but also that there really is no resistance here. A soldier gets sent, Joseph Revere, he gets sent carrying 2 American flags with the 27 stars at that time. And he's carrying these flags. He goes north to Sonoma. When he arrives, one of the flags is raised in front of the barracks at Sonoma, and that's when pretty much the Bear Flag Revolt is over, the California Republic is over, the United States has seized California. American forces blew off the idea of using El Castillo. Besides, there were no guns. Mexican forces had, maybe anticipating what the Americans were going to do, had taken the guns to San Juan Bautista and buried them there. So what the Americans would do is they would go further up the hill because they decided the position of El Castillo really stank. And they created a new fortification, which mostly was going by the name of Fort Merrydale, although it also was called Fort Stockard, Fort Savannah, named after Sloat's ship, Fort Fremont, and sometimes known as Fort Halleck. While the new Fort Merrydale is being built, Fremont hears about the declaration of war and the fall of Monterey and Yerba Buena, which is going to become San Francisco, and he heads south, and he's got his surveying party with him, and he's got the Osos, the bear flaggers that are tagging along, and they're gonna leave a path of destruction. They are going to be absolutely loathed by Californios and Americans alike for their wanton violence. And they show up here at Monterey, and what ends up happening is Commodore Sloat hands over command to William Stockard, and what he will end up doing is, he's going to take off. And now, even with this rep of all the violence and everything, Fremont gets promoted from lieutenant to major, and he's going to be ordered to go south and reinforce what's going on in Southern California. So he will take 165 of his mountain men, and Kit Carson, who's been traveling with him, is going to go along for the ride, and 5 Delaware Indians, and they're going to board the 22-gun USS Cyan, and they're going to sail south towards San Diego. Well, that turned out to be more than I expected, so looks like I'm going to San Diego and go explore the LA area and see where the connection is with the Mexican War. Hope you stick with me.